Cool. So I am doing some work at the moment on something called the personal sovereignty plan. And I'm not 100% sure of the name, and I'm also not 100% sure of all the various elements. And that's not really the point of today, but I want to share why I think this is important. I think at the moment, the world is kind of weird. There's a lot of stuff happening. I don't trust anything that I read anyway. I don't believe anything I see on the news. I am being very, very cautious with what I choose to take in. I think I have found myself in some difficult times already on when I've shown up on social media to talk about something which has been polarizing to somebody else, where I shared something about all lives matters, thinking that all lives matters was me just saying that every single person's life matters, and everybody that was on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon cut me down, and the communication was very like attacking. And I realized that there's a lot of polarity in the world at the moment. And so how do we, this work that I'm doing around the personal sovereignty plan is, what are the things that we need to be able to navigate these really difficult times? And sovereignty is this part of being a self-responsible human being, where you don't take any news that doesn't feel good for you. You can choose to read whatever you like, but if it doesn't feel good for you, to be able to have a framework to be able to navigate that. And this personal sovereignty plan is something that I've been looking at for a while, and I've been looking at various other creators that are doing similar stuff, but I'll break down more or less what they are. This is not the point of today's session, but the communication piece is. So the first one is personal practices, to be able to identify some personal routines that support you. These could be a meditation practice. These could be things like exercise, intimacy practices with your partner, whatever those things are, will be broken down in a little bit more detail. But I think it's an important part to maintain your personal sovereignty is to have practices that ground you and keep you centered. The second, which we'll cover today, is communication skills. How are you able to communicate in a world where, if my opinion is that every single person's life matters, how am I able to communicate that to a person that thinks that me saying that is somehow taking away from the movement around Black Lives Matter? How do I show up and have a way to be able to communicate with people around my views, what's true for me, but at the same time to be able to create a safe space to listen to the other person and see, what is this person so triggered about? How am I able to listen to them in that way? The next is our ability to be able to set boundaries. How are we able to know what's good for us and know where that line is when it comes to personal medical sovereignty? I'm able to choose my body is not going to have anything done to it that I choose not to do. That may be a personal boundary. I may be in an intimate connection where I have certain things that are not a full yes for me. To be able to articulate those, firstly to myself, to know what my personal boundaries are, and to be able to hold those boundaries when I need to, is, I think, a really important part of developing personal sovereignty. I'm going through these quickly because it's not the point of today. Access to community. I think we all need to be able to get together with like-minded people that see the world that we do the same way that we do, and be able to create a movement in the direction where we all have different skill sets, but we share a common vision. And I think at the moment, everybody's got their own ideas, and some people are doing community really well. I'd really like to create a space where we can find like-minded people that want to show up in the world in a specific way and have a community that they feel safe in, so that they can, be vulnerable, be honest, and then get feedback from one another as a way to be able to develop sovereignty. Access to your creative life force. How are you able to access creativity? This has a lot to do with problem solving. So when the world feels like it's falling down around you, how do you access the creativity that you need to solve problems? Self-reliance. This can look many different ways for many different people. For some, it might be a vegetable garden that grows all your own food. For others, it might be an underground bunker. For others, it might be a couple of $100 under the mattress. But how are you able to be self-reliant so that you're not dependent on the state, the government, your job, or whatever it is? To be truly sovereign, you need to be self-reliant. Control your own income. Find a way to be able to be making some money on your own. So again, you're not reliant on the only way you get your income is from universal basic income or from your boss or job. So, the idea of side hustles has been coming up quite a bit. I think being able to control your own income is an important part of your sovereignty plan. Have a process for sense making. How do you trust what you read? How do you know if there have been so many cases today. Like, do you believe that? Is it this way, or what is the process that you follow to gather information and to make sense of that information so that you can make decisions? And the last one is privacy. So understanding what privacy means to you and what it is that you're prepared to give away in terms of privacy for certain things. So when you go onto Facebook, you realize that when you share your stories and go live on there, that data no longer belongs to you, but you've given up the opportunity there in exchange for the ability to be able to connect with the community. So privacy is the last one, but I just wanted to give you those as a personal sovereignty plan. And today we are tackling number 2. So what's the importance of communication? I think this is going to be pretty elementary for most of us. I just want to break it down in this way so you can see how it fits together. But really, it's made up of 2 parts: listening and speaking. It's important as a way for us to understand what the other person wants. If we're going to be able to build communities, build trust, and build safety, it's very much a 2-way street, a bi-directional process. So if myself and Maria are having a conversation and it's just me the whole time, I'm not spending any time listening and understanding what the other person wants. It's how we get to express our own needs. So in the speaking component, once we've been through the process of understanding exactly what our desires are, so we're able to express our desires, what our boundaries are, we use communication to be able to clearly and directly state that. And so in terms of the sovereignty plan, this is an important piece to be able to, once we know what those boundaries are, use clear communication to be able to talk to our needs to keep us safe. Because I think many of us may have 2 things happen. First of all, we don't know what our boundaries are. So we just go into a world and suddenly we're like in a place where, I don't know, I'll give you a real example at the moment. Myself and my partner, Araminta, are having discussions about what is the right relationship to talk about the crazy world and coronaviruses and lockdown and stuff like that. So I'll be sitting there doing something creative, perhaps. She's read something on the news and she comes and says, "Oh my God, did you hear London's just gone into level 3 lockdown and blah, blah, blah." And suddenly, like, I'm wearing all of this heaviness that I chose not to have. And so me being able to articulate what my desires are is like, actually, let's create a space where you check in with me first before you talk to me about the bad coronavirus news, and I'll do the same for you. So first of all, knowing what those boundaries are and being able to articulate them to the other person is a really critical piece of effective communication. And like I said before, it creates connection when done properly, and it creates disconnection. And this comes to a story that I just want to quickly share with you. And it really links closely to authenticity. If some of the work that I've been doing recently focuses a lot on story, and the other part focuses a lot on authenticity. And I think what we need in the world at the moment is more of us to be in our authenticity and to be able to show up authentically in our communications with one another. And I want to give you a quick story of when I was living in South Africa. I had been building my business there, and I was in a pretty dark space. I had been broken up with my girlfriend probably for about 3 or 4 years. I've been spending a lot of time working on building my business, but despite making money, I was pretty disconnected from myself. I would spend a lot of time out partying. I was taking a lot of drugs, and I was just not in a healthy, balanced place. And as a result, my business started to fail. But I had this persona that I wanted the world to know that Gareth was the guy that had a good, solid business and everything was always together. And this is the face, the mask, if you want to call it, that I wanted the world to see. This is the perception of how I wanted the world to see me. So what would happen is I would go for a drink or lunch with somebody that was a really good friend, and they would be like, "Hey, how's it going? Good. How's business? Yeah, it's okay, getting over it." And I would quickly try and shift the conversation away from the things that weren't going well in my life to move the conversation in a different direction so that I didn't have to talk about what was really alive in me. On reflection now, what happens in that situation is, let's say, for example, it's me and Alex going for lunch, and Alex is asking about my business, and it's actually going really badly. When she says, "How's your business?" or "How's things going at work?" or whatever the question is, there's a moment when my energetic body goes and lets her know that things are not going well. And then I suddenly go, "Yeah, it's going okay." And there's this cognitive dissonance that the other person feels where energetically they felt something that isn't matched up with the actual words that you're saying. It's like that feeling when you get, when you come home to your partner and you're like, hey, how's it going? Fine. There's that moment where fine doesn't match the actual body language and the energetic vibe that you're getting. And so this is where communication is not being done properly. Oh my God. Itchy throat. Excuse me. Where if communication is not being done authentically, the other person feels that and starts to feel a really strong disconnection from the other person. So I don't know why, but when I went for lunch with Alex, I just didn't feel connected to her. She said all the right things. She said business was going well, but for some reason we just didn't connect. And it's because in that moment, one of us wasn't communicating authentically. And I think that's a really important part of this communication process, to be able to show up authentically and talk about the parts that are sometimes not always spoken about. The last piece, which relates a lot to manifestation, is being aware or conscious of our internal communication. The stories that we have inside our head, the stories that we choose to communicate to ourselves, not to the outside world as well, but internally, end up becoming your reality. So if I believe that, business was really, really difficult and the coronavirus was, the reason that all businesses are failing, if I carried on that conversation long enough inside my head, unconsciously, my world would start to look like that. I would continually find externalities in my world that confirmed my internal narrative to be true. As you start to become aware of that narrative and how you're consciously communicating with yourself, you're able to shift that and be aware of that internal communication. And so that you can, by shifting that, you start to shift how you show up. And then you start to see things showing up in your world that match a new, more conscious version of internal communication. So it makes a big difference, the internal communication in your manifestation journey. Make sense? Cool. Okay, so I want to quickly talk about non-violent communication. And Alex has put her hand up.
I just wanted to ask about the slides. Are they meant to be
Yes.
moving along?
Yes. Are they not?
No, we're still on the first slide.
Oh. Oh, and they're so pretty as well. What is going on? I think if you press, there we go. I just do it like this. Can you see now? I think what happens is when I press play, we lose some of the funkiness. Anyway, this is my 4 components of non-violent communication. So non-violent communication is really a method of communication that's been around for a few years now, but it's really broken down into 4 parts. And what it is, first of all, observation, feelings, your personal feelings, understanding your needs, and then being able to request what it is that you need. So if we take a look at the first one, which is observe, in an exchange, a communication exchange between 2 people, the first part of nonviolent communication is to observe. This is about consciously taking in the information, and it's basically the listening phase. So as you get into a communication with somebody, let's say, for example, it feels like it's suddenly exploding around you. I'll use my example with All Lives Matters versus Black Lives Matters. In that moment, I just felt like I was being attacked because I had shared something on social media that had triggered a whole lot of people. So before you jump straight back in and start fighting your point and telling the other person why they're actually wrong, nonviolent communication gets you to this place of going through these 4 steps. So first of all, you observe, consciously take in what's happening, listening, and asking questions to gain clarity. Start to understand exactly what it is that's happening in this communication exchange. So the first step is to observe. The second is to check in with yourself and listen to what you're feeling. What emotions are coming up for you? We spoke about this at the beginning of this call, just to be consciously aware of your body, which is this amazing machine letting you know in every single moment what's coming up for you. So rage, okay, that's interesting. Why am I feeling rage? Why am I feeling defensive? Whatever these things are is all part of the second phase, where you're allowing yourself to tune in to what it is that you're feeling. The third phase is, what do you need? What do you personally need? So what would make you feel safe? And again, understanding what your boundaries are, exactly around this particular conversation. And the fourth phase is to actually directly request it. So clearly communicate what you need, and then ensure that the other person has understood your needs. Something about this request phase is important as well, because while it's a direct communication to the other person, it's super important that you tune into seeing whether what your request is has landed with them. So it's like, hey, I really need you to know that when you say blah, 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 it makes me feel uncomfortable. Are you clear about that? And the other person goes, yeah. The idea there is to say, no, are you sure? Because I didn't feel that you got it properly. So in addition to communicating your request, it's also super important to make sure that you question that the other person has heard and understood you, as well as just feeling into whether you feel like it landed for them. Make sense? So there are three, these four phases are also sort of broken up into three different parts. And it's really this idea of self-empathy, being aware of your own feelings when you have this conversation. Empathy for the other person, so how are being aware of their feelings, and then the honest self-expression, which is the communication of your needs. So how does that look exactly? I want to give you a four-part process right now that you can use to be able to clear something with somebody. So it's like when, let's say, for example, Alex, when you do A, it makes me feel B. What is that? How do I feel? Because C, this is the reason that I feel that way. And then there's the direct request for them to do something different. Would you mind? And then fill it in with D. So I'm going to give you this format, and this is one of the things that you're going to be able to practice now when we go out into our smaller breakout groups, to feel into what would be an actual event that's happening in your life, a difficult conversation that you want to have with somebody, and go through it in this format. So I will share one that I had recently with Araminta. And Araminta, when she cooks oatmeal, she lets it go all the way to the bottom, and then it starts to burn, and then she takes it off and serves it. And then the pot has like this crust of oatmeal at the bottom, which doesn't really need to be there, because if you cook the oatmeal and you watch it and continually stir it, you don't have to burn the bottom part, and cleaning the pot is always a lot easier. So when I come to do the dishes and Araminta's made oatmeal, I'm normally like, fuck, why do I have to suffer through this, like scrubbing the bottom of the pot? So anyway, Araminta, when you burn the bottom of the oatmeal, I feel frustrated because the task of washing dishes just feels like it's more painful than it needs to be. Would you mind please keeping an eye on the oatmeal and stirring it consistently so that it doesn't catch on the bottom, and cleaning it is not a ball ache? So that's an example of how you can use this format to clear something with the other person. And this format allows you to welcome Mandeep. Thanks for checking in. We are going through a process called nonviolent communication, and nice to see you. So what this does is, before you tell the other person that they're an idiot because they don't know how to cook oatmeal, you let them know that actually I'm feeling frustrated or annoyed, and it's a result of something that you've done, and this is why it's annoying me, and this is my direct request of how I could make this, how you could make this better in the future. So this is one format that you're able to use to have difficult conversations. So it follows the format of, when you do X, I feel Y because of Z, and then would you, and that would be A or whatever it is. So you follow the structure of being able to get people to really understand what it is that's triggering you, and then how it is that they can directly change it. So that's one. I want to just share one last quick one with you before we break out into our groups. And this second tool is called fears and desires. So basically how this looks is, I'm going to give you another example. I'm actually going to add this in here. That sounds like cool. So here's another format that you guys can use. A little while ago, I was having some challenges with a business partner of mine. You guys all know Matt. And I practiced this tool to help. I didn't feel like he was always showing up. Some days he would not do things that we had agreed. And I wanted to try and solve this because it felt like it was becoming a burden on our business relationship. So essentially what I did is I sat him down, and the first thing you do before you have a difficult conversation, you just check in and say, Hey, Matt, I want to talk to you about some business stuff quickly. Is now a good time for us to have a drop in? So you check in and get consent from the person first. Then you start by stating your desires. Hey, I really want to connect with you because I'm feeling a little bit out in our business relationship. And I want to have this conversation so that we can solve this and have a better, more solid business relationship. So you state the desires, why you want to have this conversation. What's your reason for wanting to have it? The second phase is you state your fears. I'm a little bit concerned. My own fears about having this conversation with you are, I'm a little bit concerned that you might think that I'm bullying you or that I'm being too much of a hard ass. You get to state exactly what you think or what your actual fears are about this conversation. I'm worried that you're going to get upset and walk out the door. Whatever your actual fears are, you get the chance to own them before you tell the person exactly what it is that's bothering you. Is that cool? Setting up your desires, what it is that you hope to achieve from this conversation, and then stating your fears after first checking in. So those first 3 steps happen. The next thing I use is a process called I'm telling myself a story that sounds like. The reason that is so disarming and so powerful is because, let's say, for example, I'm saying to Matt, you are an asshole because you haven't done the things that you said you would do. And the last 3 times you blah, blah, blah. Suddenly you've moved into a very different communication space to the part of one that starts like this. Hey, bro, I'm telling myself a story that sounds like this. We're supposed to be 50-50 partners in this business. You have things that you continually need to do. And when you don't do them, it feels like you're not showing up for our business. And but you started off with a story that I'm telling myself. So it's in no way a direct attack on the other person. It's really just the articulation of what it is that's triggered inside you as a result of your own story. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you started off by saying, I'm telling myself a story I could have done this with the washing as well. I'm telling myself a story that sounds like this. Araminta's in too much of a rush in the morning and she doesn't take the time to focus on the oatmeal. And now I'm the one that's got to deep dive into the dishes all the time. And it takes an extra 10 minutes to scrub the pot and it doesn't need to happen. That's my story that I'm telling myself. And I actually use that sentence when I'm connecting with the other person. I say, I'm telling myself a story that sounds like you're in so much of a rush that you don't worry about the oatmeal. So this format of checking in with the person to make sure it's a good time, letting them know your desire for this communication, what it is that you want to get from it. In the case of the oatmeal, my desire may have been to just have a more harmonious home life with your partner. Articulate your own fears. I fear you're going to not make breakfast again, or you're going to take it personally, or whatever it is. And then start it off by saying, I'm telling myself a story that sounds like, and then deliver what it is that's actually alive in you.